Hi, my name's Steve from 3D-Hub, and this lesson is to demonstrate the principles of geometric dynamic text and labels. Now, the first thing really is to explain what the principles of geometric dynamic text actually means. So if we go to the Add-ins tab here and go to Install FXP Presentation, if you've been following all the previous lessons, you'll know exactly what I'm doing here. It's just opening up the PowerPoint file and putting all the assets in the correct place. So here we have the PowerPoint representation of the lesson. If we go to FX Edit and go full screen, you can see here some very familiar objects. We have the rotating pyramid in the middle, we have the blue stripy torus around the outside. The buttons with the functionality still exist that you've been programming in the previous lessons. The only difference is the text and the arrows, which as you can see are always facing towards the camera as you rotate the objects. And the text at the bottom here, which says Lesson 4 Geometric Text. So two things, it's geometric text, so if I press F8 on the keyboard, you can see here it will turn everything into polygons. And you can see that the text is made up of polygon geometry, so that's why it's called geometric. If I press F8, you'll come back. The second part of the phrase that we use, dynamic, basically means that the text is actually created at runtime from the code that we create when we're creating the lesson. So this gives us the ability to assign the text an ID, which in turn allows us to change the text at a future date. Now, the reason why we'd want to change the text at a future date, firstly, is because, as you can see here, I've spelled pyramid wrong. And secondly, if at a future time you wanted to change the language of your lesson, rather than opening up all the max files, changing the text to a different language, republishing it, re-putting it into PowerPoint, republishing the PowerPoint as an FXD file and going through the whole process, much simpler way of doing it is just to use the text resource editor. So if we come out of here, the text resource editor is a function that you can open from within advanced slide options, but it's also a dialog box that can be opened within 3D-Hub Player. Now, there is a separate lesson all about changing or translating text within a lesson, so I won't go into it too deeply, but it does mean that obviously all the text that you're creating in this lesson, whether it be within PowerPoint or within 3D Studio Max, is what we call dynamic. Therefore, we can then change it at a future date very quickly and very easily. Even the teacher has the ability to change this text. Obviously, if you were to create geometric, proper, good old-fashioned text within 3D Studio Max, or equally, if you were to create PowerPoint text, this text would still appear in your lesson. The only difference would be it wouldn't be dynamic. We wouldn't be able to change it at a future date. So if you stick with the principles we're showing here, you'll be able to change the text. If you want to be a bit quick and a bit lazy, what you can do is, if you went to PowerPoint and created some text here, I'm just putting some gobbledygook in there, change the color to white. You'll see here, if I go to FX Edit, go full screen, that text appears. So you can create text in PowerPoint. Equally, you can create text as you would normally create text in 3D Studio Max. But again, you won't be able to change this text at a future date without having to, you'll have to open up PowerPoint and edit it yourself, or you'll have to open up 3D Studio Max. So lesson learned here, try and stick with the principles of the dynamic text. Okay, we're going to delete that and we're going to open up 3D Studio Max. I've already got the file open here. Just have a quick look around the file. You've still got the pyramid in the center. You do have your positional dummies here, which were for your action sets, your positional blend action sets. We still have the rotational blend action set dummies, and we also have the visibility stand-ins here. So nothing's really changed in the scene apart from, as you can see here, we have some arrows and some text. First thing I'll quickly talk about are the arrows. The arrows are something that we have given you in your default setup scene, and they're quite handy because they have these little blue crosses at the end of them which make the arrows what we call stretchy. So for instance, if you grab the first blue point, this is called the arrow start point, and when you move it, the whole arrow moves around from that end. But if you grab the other end and move it around, you'll see here it becomes a stretchy arrow, and the arrow head will always point in the correct direction. So that's just a nice quick way of creating arrows. The other thing you'll notice there is the text. Now this is stand-in text. The text that we're producing here and that we apply a script to will not actually be rendered as far as it's not 3D Studio Max. This is just a visual representation for you so that when you're creating your scene within 3D Studio Max, you can see what the text would look like, the size of the text and its position relative to the objects. So we're going to open up Max Script, the user defined properties. This is the same script that you used previously to do the action sets for all the positional, blending, rotational, visibility. And what we're going to do here is concentrate on the geometric dynamic text pull down. Okay, now we'll go through the list of attributes now. The first thing we're going to do is select some text in the scene, and we're going to get geometric text label properties. So if I click on that button there, you'll see that it's loaded up the properties of that text. So the first thing you can see here is this is a torus, because this is obviously, and funny enough, that's what the text says there. If you wanted to create multi-line text labels, type in a second, a third, a fourth and a fifth line. So you can create multi-line text labels. The font, pretty self-explanatory. We only use Windows system fonts because the font is created at runtime, the system must have the font installed. So we do try and stick to the fonts that Windows generally has already built into it. The size, again, if you make that bigger and smaller, the text will actually change size. Whether you want the text bold or italic, whether is a simple tick of yes or no. What you will notice though, that if I were to make the text bold and hit apply, the positional representational text in 3D Studio Max won't actually change to bold. This is because, I don't know if you're aware, but 3D Studio Max actually has a separate font for bold. It's not a simple tick box facility within your text editor. So again, the text really is just for positional and to get an idea of where it is within your scene. It's not a true representation, but it is very, very close. Something that is very, very important is your resource ID. Now, every piece of text within your 3D Studio Max scene must have a separate resource ID. This is something you manually have to change. Within PowerPoint, when you're entering label text, these the resource IDs are automatically generated and will automatically increment. But within 3D Studio Max, within the script, you will have to generate a new number. It can be any number you want, just as long as it doesn't already exist within your 3D Studio Max. And again, this is the resource ID is only for text. It's nothing for none of the other objects matter, just text, because we use the resource ID at runtime when we want to change the text into a different language. Text alignment, again, self-explanatory. Center, left and right for horizontal alignment, vertical alignment, center, top, bottom. Face forward, true or false. You notice when we're in PowerPoint and I entered into the lesson, when I rotated the lesson around, all the text face forward. This is really useful obviously for labels. If, however, you wanted to apply the text to the side of, so let's say, a box, and the text had to rotate around with the box and always be, as it were, glued to the side of the box, you'd simply click the false radio button, and that would mean that the text would rotate around and not always face forward. Okay. The 3D text shape is, you can apply very subtle bevels. You can make the text taper, so you can actually change the 3D nature of the text itself. Again, it just needs a little bit of playing around with, and when you create a bevel, you can obviously give the side of the bevel a separate color. So this is quite useful if you're trying to put light text onto a light background. You would say give the text a bevel, give it a dark color, and this will give it a very subtle outline. So this is quite key. So one thing that I didn't mention was, the horizontal offset. This is actually probably one thing that's not self-explanatory. The text you see here at the moment, you can see by the XYZ coordinates on the end here, this is its pivot point. The pivot point is what the text will rotate around using its face forward technique. So for instance, because the lead arrow here comes towards the S, when we rotate the objects around, when we rotate the camera around in the scene and we want the text to face forward, it will always pivot around the pivot point, which is near the S. Equally, if we wanted the pivot point to pivot around the center, we would change the horizontal offset to 0.5. If we hit apply here, you can see the pivot point now has moved to the center. So when the text rotates around in the lesson, it will rotate around the pivot point now, which will be in the center. Equally, if I just put that back to 1 for now, and just realign it back, you'll notice here, if I get the properties for this text, it's got a horizontal offset of 0. This is because we want to pivot around the left hand side of the text, as you can see here where the pivot point is. So when we rotate the lesson around, it will always rotate around the left hand side of the text. So that's really all to do with the face forward value and to make sure that the text rotates around a certain point. Obviously this horizontal offset, I've used 0 being left, 0.5 being middle, 1 being right. If you want to finesse that and make it a different value, 0.2, that would rotate obviously 20% along the text line. Okay, now as you can see here, this is actually spelled incorrectly, so first thing I'm going to do is actually change that. Pyramid, stick an R in, hit apply, and you can see here that it's now pyramid, so that's changed. Again, this is just the visual representation, but it gives you an idea of what the text will look like at runtime. So what we'll do here is we'll export the scene. That lesson's exported, and if we go back into PowerPoint, press FX Edit, go full screen, you can see that the text now has changed to pyramid, so the text correction's been made. So what we'll do now is if we click on OK, go back to 3D Studio Max, we'll create some new geometry, a new label and a new arrow. The easiest way to do this is if we just quickly create a box. Let's create it to the side here. We'll give it a material, because remember everything must have a material if it's geometry. Green stripy box. Just rotate the camera around, there we go. By far the easiest thing to do is to copy one of our templated texts, so we'll do that for now. Copy. You'll notice here again the stretchy arrow, this is the end which moves the arrow around, and this is the end that makes it nice and stretchy. So we'll point it towards the box, there we have it on the corner, and we'll move the text down just above it. Now you can see here what I've done is put the text, if I zoom in, I've put the text center aligned on top of the arrow. Obviously the pivot point is still on the far right, so we need to change that. So if we get the attributes for this text, you'll see here this is a torus, that's obviously incorrect, we'll change that to the word box. We're going to make the text bigger, we're going to make it twice the size of all the other texts, text 2, we're going to make it bold. We're going to give it another or a unique text resource ID or language resource ID. We're going to call this 105. Now the horizontal offset is what we need to change to 0.5, which will center the pivot point to the text. And if we hit apply now, you'll see here the text is twice the size, the pivot points move to the center. If we zoom out, we can see, if we go to the camera view, you can see whether that's correct. Yep, that's exactly how we want it. Go to export. The little green bar at the bottom here just tells you the export progress. That's done. Go back into PowerPoint. And you can see here we've got the text is twice the size of all the other text. It's in bold, and when we spin it around, it's rotating around the pivot point, which is now at the center. So this is how we quickly and simply label things within the lesson. One thing you will notice though, that when I remove the pyramid, the text also removes, because the last thing you want there is, if the pyramid was to be removed, the label to obviously point to nothing. When we bring it back, the text comes back. That's achieved really quite simply. If we go back to 3D Studio Max here, if you remember from a previous lesson, we talked about the visibility, and we had the visibility stand-ins. So if we go back to action sets here and get the action set properties of these visibility stand-ins, you can see here the clip target, which was the clip target is the geometry that we actually want to change with the action set. So the visibility stand-in here, its clip set target was originally just the word pyramid, which affected obviously the pyramid, making that invisible and come back again. What we've also added there is the pyramid label and the pyramid text, and all we've done is included a colon between each of these labels. Now these labels are what these items are named in 3D Studio Max. So if I click on the text for the pyramid, you'll see up here it says pyramid text, and that obviously relates to the word pyramid text in our clip target. So this is what we're actioning when we trigger the action set. And you'll notice here what I've done is I've grouped all the objects within that stretchy arrow, and I've called that group pyramid label. So you can see here pyramid text is this item here, and pyramid label is that item there. So that when that action set visibility on, visibility off happens, it will change the visibility of the arrow and the label at the same time as the pyramid itself. So that's really useful when you're creating your lessons and you want to turn off the text and the labels together with the objects. The reason why we don't group the text, the arrow and the object all together and just use one phrase as a clip set target is because the text will lose its dynamic properties. So the language ID that you've assigned it will not work, so you will not be able to change that language at a future date. So the text has to be kept separate. Okay, so that's the text within 3D Studio Max for things like these arrows and labels. The other text we create is within PowerPoint, and that's for things like the lesson titles and also for labeling the interface, so labeling the buttons that we've created that fire off the action sets. So we'll just generate some new text for one of these buttons. So advanced, slide options, and again it's a dynamic UI control panel at the bottom here, and the item that we want to create is a label, so we click on the label button there. The control ID, this can be anything you want. It's not actually related to the text within the button. It's just for you to, when you see a list of control IDs, to understand what the control ID is for. So this one is going to be the pyramid viz label. We can change the horizontal alignment and the vertical alignment. We're not really sure how we want the layout to look, so we'll leave that as centered. What we will do is click on Set Resource ID, and that brings up the Text Resource Editor. Now this will have a list of all the text that's currently in your lesson within PowerPoint, not within the insert scene, which is the 3D Studio Max. That's generated separately. So this is all to do with the PowerPoint text. So at the top here, that's the text currently at the bottom of the lesson, which says Lesson 4 Geometric Text. What we need to do now is create a new line or a new resource for the label that we're creating. So we want to add a label that says Pyramid Visibility. Okay, and when we click on the Add Resource, that will add it in as number 2. So we can see here we've got a resource ID of number 2. The word is Pyramid Visibility. The size is 12, which was the default size that's been chosen at the top there. If you want to change the default size, you simply just change it at the top here. You can change the font by choosing a different font, and that will then be the font and font size and style that you use every time you create a new resource ID. So for now, we think that's fine. We're going to save and close, insert label, and you can see there in the center of the screen, it's inserted the placeholder. Now the placeholder currently only has the resource ID number. It doesn't have any more information. You can put more information in there. We commonly put visibility, the actual text that the label has, to remind us really of what the actual label is. So if we go to FX Edit and go to full screen, okay, so here we can see that the label's been generated. What we're going to do is we're going to press the Control key on your keyboard down, and at the same time press the left-hand mouse click, which will bring up the UI authoring dialog box. This is similar to the way we open the UI authoring dialog box for the buttons, if you remember the toggle states, and also the action sets and how to link action sets to the buttons. But this is one for labels. The first thing you can see, this is the Pyramid Viz label, so this is the control ID that we generated for that label. What I want to do is change the alignment now to horizontal alignment to right, and I also want to change the font size. So if we go to Pyramid Visibility and change the font size to 20, you will need to click the Update Resource button in the bottom here, because what will happen is the save and close will only save what information is currently up here at the top half. So if I didn't hit Update Resources, this wouldn't change, and when you hit save and close, it also wouldn't save it. So if I hit save and close now, update label, you can see it's changed. Now the reason why that's cut it off halfway through the M is because the placeholder that we put into PowerPoint wasn't long enough. So if we just escape out of that, just drag the label over a bit, you'll see that when we go back into FX Edit, the Pyramid Visibility label is correct. So that's how we change and create dynamic text within PowerPoint. So that's how you would create all your labels and your lesson titles. And that's pretty much it. So we've been through creating text within 3D Studio Max, which is, as I said, dynamic and can be changed at a future date for languages and for corrections. We've been through the generation of the arrows, how to control the arrows along with the text, and we've also been through the creation of dynamic text within PowerPoint and labeling. So that's it. I hope you get on really well with the lesson, and hopefully catch up with you soon.